Cambridge, England, March 1939. War was coming. The newspapers spoke of treaties breaking, armies marching, and a continent sliding toward catastrophe. But inside a quiet college room at Trinity Hall, a young mathematics student bent over a sheet of paper, lost in thought. His name was William Thomas Tutte, Bill to his friends, and while Europe prepared for destruction, he was unknowingly preparing for one of the most astonishing feats of mental warfare in history. He wasn't a soldier nor a spy. He was a boy from Newmarket, the son of a gardener and a housekeeper who had earned a scholarship through brilliance alone. His fascination wasn't with politics or power, but with patterns, the kind hidden in numbers, in puzzles, in nature itself. Those patterns would soon lead him into the heart of the British war effort. When war erupted in September 1939, the call for mathematicians went out across Britain. The government needed minds capable of breaking the codes that held the Nazi war machine together. Cambridge was one of the main recruiting grounds. One day, Tutte and his classmates were given a strange challenge by one of their professors, a cryptic crossword puzzle. They had no idea it was a secret test for Bletchley Park, the newly formed code-breaking centre of His Majesty's government. Tutte solved the puzzle effortlessly. Within weeks, a letter arrived marked confidential. It invited him to join a team that didn't officially exist, in a place that couldn't be named. By the end of 1940, Bill Tutte was standing before the gates of Bletchley Park, unaware that this quiet country estate hid one of the most secret and significant operations of the entire war. Bletchley was unlike anywhere else. Mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, and classicists worked side by side, surrounded by barbed wire and absolute secrecy. Their task: to break the German Enigma cipher, the code that encrypted every military message sent by the Wehrmacht. Most thought Enigma was unbreakable, but Tutte's supervisors had a different job for him, one even more daunting. By 1941, British intelligence had begun intercepting radio signals that didn't match Enigma's patterns. They were longer, more complex, the communications of the German High Command itself. These messages were protected by a new encryption system known as Lorenz, codenamed Tunny by the British. Lorenz was used not by field officers, but by Hitler, Keitel, Jodl and their top generals to communicate strategic orders across Europe. It was, in essence, the voice of the German war machine. No one at Bletchley had ever seen a Lorenz machine. They only had streams of coded letters, meaningless sequences of alphabet soup pouring from wireless receivers. To break it would require not just mathematics, but imagination. Tutte began his analysis in a small, dimly lit hut labeled Hut 8A, armed only with pencil, paper and logic. He examined hundreds of intercepted messages, searching for patterns where others saw chaos. The task seemed impossible. 12 interlocking wheels, thousands of possible settings, no physical reference. Yet Tutte had one advantage: an ability to think in structures rather than symbols. Where others saw random letters, he saw mechanisms. For weeks, he reconstructed what the machine behind the code might look like. He hypothesized that Lorenz used two sets of rotors, one to generate a pseudo-random key stream, another to shift it, and that its logical design might be deduced purely from statistical relationships. Piece by piece, he reverse-engineered an invisible machine. In December 1941, without ever touching a Lorenz device, Bill Tutte deduced its entire logical architecture. It was a breakthrough so extraordinary that his colleagues compared it to rebuilding a watch from its echoes. The revelation allowed engineers at the Post Office Research Station in Dollis Hill to construct an electromechanical replica of the Lorenz cipher, a device they called Heath Robinson. It would later inspire the creation of Colossus, the world's first programmable electronic computer. But that triumph was still to come. For now, Tutte's insight had given Britain its first real look into the enemy's high command communications. Every decoded Lorenz message provided invaluable intelligence. Hitler's invasion plans, supply movements, even discussions about V-2 rockets and the Eastern Front. What had started as one man's quiet analysis in a country cottage was now shaping decisions that affected millions. And through it all, Tutte remained invisible. He never sought recognition, never spoke of his work. Even his family believed he was doing statistics for the government. Inside Bletchley's walls, he lived a life of silence, his only voice expressed in the patterns he uncovered. As the war intensified, Tutte's discoveries would become the cornerstone of Allied code-breaking. His logic and perseverance would open doors that even the most advanced machines couldn't. But in 1941, he was still just a student in a war of minds, facing a challenge that could change the outcome of history. If you're fascinated by stories of intellect defeating force, of quiet minds shaping global events, make sure to like this video and subscribe for the next chapters of this incredible true story. It helps us bring more untold histories to light. Because behind every victory, there's a mind that saw what others could not. And so we ask, if one man, armed only with a pencil, could expose the secrets of a dictator, what else in history has been changed by those we never see? Bletchley Park, England, February 1942. Outside, the English countryside lay under frost, its fields silent beneath a grey winter sky. Inside the huts of Bletchley Park, the war was being fought not with guns, but with logic. Every message captured by the wireless stations arrived as a stream of letters, meaningless, mechanical, yet hiding decisions that could shift the balance of the entire conflict. Among the small team of mathematicians now assigned to the fish section, one name had begun to stand out: Bill Tutte. By now, his reconstruction of the Lorenz Cipher machine had stunned even his superiors. Without ever seeing the device, he had described its 12 rotating wheels and predicted how each step produced a different coded letter. The accuracy of his deduction was so complete that when engineers later obtained an actual Lorenz machine from captured equipment, they found Tutte's mental design was almost identical. But there was still a problem. The method he had uncovered was too complex for humans to calculate quickly. To read one Lorenz message by hand could take weeks. By the time the Allies had an answer, the war would have moved on. Tutte's next challenge was not to understand the machine, but to find a way to defeat it in real time. To make progress, Bletchley Park brought in Tommy Flowers, an engineer from the post office research station. Flowers had been experimenting with electronic switches, vacuum tubes, that could perform calculations faster than any mechanical system. Tutte's work provided the logic. Flowers provided the speed. Together, their ideas would give birth to the world's first electronic computer. In early 1943, Flowers and his team built the Heath Robinson, a large, noisy electromechanical device designed to test possible wheel settings of the Lorenz Cipher. The machine worked, but it was slow and prone to breaking down. Still, it proved one thing: Tutte's mathematics could be mechanized. The idea that a machine could process logic, not just numbers, was revolutionary. Without realizing it, Tutte's theoretical insight was pushing humanity toward the age of computing. As the project evolved, Flowers proposed a radical improvement to replace the mechanical switches with electronic valves, which could perform the same operations thousands of times faster. Many at Bletchley doubted him. They thought valves were unreliable. But Tutte supported the idea. He understood that the speed of logic mattered as much as its precision. The machine that emerged from this partnership was called Colossus. By late 1943, the first Colossus was ready. Standing taller than a man and glowing with hundreds of valves, it looked more like a giant radio than a computer. Yet when the operators fed intercepted Lorenz messages into it, Colossus could test millions of combinations in minutes, what would have taken Tutte weeks by hand. It was the beginning of automated code breaking, and the world's first glimpse of digital computation. Each breakthrough at Bletchley Park was buried under layers of secrecy. The work was so classified that few inside the same compound even knew what the others were doing. Tutte's section, nicknamed Testery after its founder Major Ralph Tester, worked alongside the engineers of Newmanry, named after mathematician Max Newman. Between them, they turned Tutte's theory into a production system capable of decrypting thousands of messages every month. Those decrypted messages, known under the code name Ultra, were sent directly to the Allied command. They revealed the positions of German divisions, supply lines, and troop movements on the Eastern Front. They exposed Hitler's conversations with his generals, his doubts about the Western Allies, and his expectations for the coming battles. Every piece of intelligence derived from Tutte's logic saved lives and shaped strategy. General Eisenhower later said that the Ultra program shortened the war by at least 2 years. And yet, Tutte remained largely unseen. He avoided recognition, preferring his quiet desk and stacks of notepaper. His handwriting filled hundreds of pages, each line a new test, a new pattern, a new possibility. His focus was absolute. Colleagues described him as shy, thoughtful, and humble, a man who seemed unaware of his own brilliance. Bletchley Park itself was a strange community. In the evenings, workers might attend concerts, play chess, or walk the gardens, yet none could speak of what they did during the day. Relationships formed in secrecy, laughter mixed with exhaustion, and the war outside felt distant, a world measured not in explosions, but in permutations and probabilities. For Tutte and his team, the enemy was abstraction. 26 letters, endlessly shifting. As 1944 approached, the decrypts became even more critical. The Allies were preparing for the greatest operation of the war, D-Day. Lorenz traffic offered rare glimpses into the thinking of the German High Command. Through Tutte's codebreaks, commanders learned that Hitler believed the invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. This misinformation, combined with the Allied deception plan, helped secure the success of the landings. Once again, Tutte's invisible work had altered history. Inside the testry huts, the news of D-Day spread in whispers. The operators celebrated quietly, then went back to work. The war was far from over, and Lorenz messages still poured in every day. Even as victory neared, the pressure remained constant. New ciphers, new variants, new challenges. Tutte's analysis evolved with them, his equations growing more refined, his insight deeper. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, the men and women of Bletchley Park were ordered to destroy all notes, diagrams, and code sheets. Colossus itself was dismantled piece by piece. What they had done would remain a secret for decades. Tutte returned to academic life, carrying the weight of knowledge he could never discuss. In a world that celebrated generals and soldiers, his name was unknown. And yet behind that anonymity lay something extraordinary. Tutte had not only broken the most advanced cipher of the war, he had also anticipated the logic that would one day define the modern world. From computers to digital communication, from encryption to artificial intelligence, all from a quiet desk in wartime England. He had turned thought into machinery and secrecy into science. But here's the question. If humanity's first computer was built to read the enemy's mind, did that moment mark the beginning of intelligence or the end of privacy? Bletchley Park, May 1945. The war in Europe was ending, the air raids had stopped, and the sound of celebration echoed through London streets. But inside the guarded gates of Bletchley Park, there was no celebration, only silence. The men and women who had spent years decoding the enemy's secrets were given one final order: destroy everything. In the days following Germany's surrender, stacks of papers were burned, machines dismantled, and blueprints shredded. The Colossus computers, those glowing giants that had once pulsed with the rhythm of war, were reduced to scrap metal and dust. History would forget them. and the minds that built them. Among the people watching quietly as it all disappeared was Bill Tutte. He had spent nearly 5 years unraveling the logic of the enemy. He had reconstructed a cipher machine no one outside Germany had ever seen. His deductions had shaped battles, influenced strategies, and perhaps even shortened the war itself. And now, all evidence of that work was being erased. He couldn't tell his friends, his parents, or even his fiancée what he had done. The official story was simple. He had worked on statistical research for the government. When Tutte left Bletchley Park that summer, the world outside felt strangely ordinary. The newspapers spoke of Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin, names that had filled history books. The mathematicians of Bletchley were ghosts, bound by the Official Secrets Act. They could not publish, lecture, or even hint at what they had achieved. Tutte was 28 years old, with one of the greatest mathematical accomplishments in modern history, and yet he was unemployed, unknown, and unable to explain why his skills mattered. He returned briefly to Cambridge, continuing his studies in graph theory, a young and abstract field of mathematics that fascinated him. It was pure, untouched by politics, a way to rebuild his mind after years of secrecy. His doctoral work explored how networks connect, how edges and nodes form structures that seem chaotic but obey hidden rules. Perhaps deep down, it was an echo of what he had done at Bletchley, finding order in confusion. In 1948, with post-war Britain struggling to recover, Tutte accepted an offer that would change his life. He moved to Canada, joining the newly founded University of Toronto and later the University of Waterloo in Ontario. There, he would quietly become one of the world's leading mathematicians, yet he rarely spoke of his wartime years. When colleagues asked about his past, he would smile politely and change the subject. While Tutte began building a new academic career, the world around him was entering a different kind of conflict: the Cold War. Intelligence agencies in both East and West raced to develop better computers, better ciphers, better surveillance. The ideas born in Bletchley Park, pattern analysis, logical deduction, machine computation, were spreading into government laboratories and universities. Tutte's legacy was already shaping this new age, though no one yet knew it. In the 1950s, Canada's scientific community was expanding rapidly. Tutte became a cornerstone of that growth. His lectures were known for their clarity and precision. His students described him as patient, modest, and deeply focused. He could make complex problems sound elegant, even simple. Yet behind his calm voice lay a history of intellectual combat, battles fought not on fields but in numbers. Years passed, and still the truth of Bletchley Park remained hidden. Even as books were written about Enigma and Alan Turing, the story of Lorenz and of Tutte's reconstruction of it stayed classified. Only a handful of people in the world knew that the greatest cipher of the German High Command had been solved, not by a machine, but by one man's reasoning. For Tutte, that silence became a way of life. He devoted himself entirely to mathematics, publishing groundbreaking work on combinatorics and graph theory. He discovered principles that would later become essential in computer science, telecommunications, and even chemistry. Yet he published none of it under the shadow of wartime fame. His name appeared only in academic journals, never in headlines. Meanwhile, Bletchley Park fell into disrepair. The huts that once held the brightest minds of the war were abandoned, their wooden walls fading with time. For decades, no plaque bore the names of those who had worked there. Tutte occasionally received quiet letters from former colleagues, brief, coded messages of respect. They all knew what they had done, even if the world didn't. In 1974, nearly 30 years after the war, the British government finally declassified parts of the Bletchley story. The public learned of Enigma, of Turing, and of the machines that had broken it. But the Lorenz cipher, Tutte's masterpiece, remained secret a while longer. When it was finally revealed in the late 1970s, historians were astonished. They realized that what Tutte had accomplished without ever seeing the machine was one of the greatest intellectual achievements of the war. By then, he was already a professor in Waterloo, teaching quietly. His fame still limited to mathematicians. The recognition came slowly, and even then he accepted it without pride. It was teamwork, he would say when interviewed, minimizing his role. But those who knew the story understood. Without Tutte's insight, the Allied command might have fought blind. In a world that had moved on to nuclear weapons and space travel, Tutte represented something almost forgotten: the power of pure thought. His mind had been his only weapon, his logic his only shield. As computers filled the earth and the concept of code-breaking became an industry, the young man who had once mapped the enemy's machine on paper now watched the world transformed by the very ideas he had helped to create. He never sought to profit from it. No medals, no patents, no political ambitions, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had contributed, that he had done his duty. And when he walked across the campus paths of Waterloo, his students saw only a kind, soft-spoken mathematician. Few realized they were passing one of the men who had changed the course of history, and so the question remains: when the world forgets the minds that saved it, does history lose part of its truth, or is true greatness measured only by the silence it leaves behind? Waterloo, Ontario, 1980. The war had been over for 35 years. The world had changed beyond recognition. Satellites orbited the Earth, computers filled offices, and information had become the new battlefield. Yet, in a modest office at the University of Waterloo, a quiet professor still wrote his formulas by hand, just as he had done in wartime England. His name was Bill Tutte, though few on campus knew that he had once changed the fate of nations. For decades, Tutte had taught, researched, and published with the same patient precision that defined his life. His work in graph theory and combinatorics had earned him respect among mathematicians around the world. He was known for his humility and deep focus, a man who cared more about the beauty of ideas than about fame. But beneath the quiet rhythm of academic life, something was beginning to shift. Across the Atlantic, historians and journalists were uncovering the hidden history of Bletchley Park. Files once marked top secret were being declassified. For the first time, the public learned that Britain's victory in the intelligence war had depended not only on Alan Turing and the Enigma code, but also on another, more complex cipher called Lorenz, and that the man who had broken it was a young mathematician named Bill Tutte. The revelation came slowly, like the lifting of a long fog. Newspapers began printing fragments of the story. Former colleagues spoke cautiously, recalling a brilliant mind who saw structure in chaos. At first, Tutte was reluctant to speak. He had kept silent for so long that breaking that habit felt almost unnatural. But as journalists and historians reached out, he realized the importance of the record. If he didn't tell his story, others might tell it for him. Or worse, it might vanish altogether. When Tutte finally gave his first interviews, his tone was modest, almost apologetic. "I just did my part," he said. "We were a team." He spoke of Bletchley Park, not as a legend, but as a workplace, cold, noisy, and crowded. He described the intercepted signals, the long nights with pencil and paper, the gradual realization that logic could defeat secrecy. He never exaggerated his role, yet his words carried quiet authority. For historians, his testimony confirmed what had long been suspected, that the Lorenz breakthrough was the most sophisticated code-breaking operation of the Second World War. Recognition followed, though Tutte never sought it. In the 1980s and 1990s, he began receiving honors for his scientific and wartime achievements. He was made a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, and later the Royal Society of London, one of the highest distinctions a scientist can receive. In 2001, a year before his death, he was appointed to the Order of Canada, the country's highest civilian honor. Britain, too, acknowledged him belatedly, calling his reconstruction of the Lorenz machine one of the greatest intellectual feats ever achieved without direct evidence. By then, Bletchley Park itself had been transformed. The once abandoned huts were restored as a museum, a place where visitors could walk the same paths the codebreakers had walked. Tutte's name appeared alongside those of Alan Turing, Gordon Welchman, and other pioneers of modern cryptography. For the first time, the world could see that victory in the information war had not been the work of one genius, but of many, and that Tutte's quiet brilliance had stood among the very brightest. In Waterloo, Tutte continued teaching until his retirement. He was loved by his students for his calm and clarity. He rarely mentioned his wartime service unless asked directly, and even then, he spoke of it as a group effort. To him, the most important thing was that mathematics, pure, honest, logical thought, had proved itself capable of defending freedom. Outside academia, the computer revolution was unfolding, the same revolution Tutte's wartime logic had helped to start. Silicon chips replaced vacuum tubes. Cryptography evolved from secret wartime code breaking into a cornerstone of everyday life. Digital communication, online banking, national security, all depended on ideas rooted in the foundations laid at Bletchley. Yet the irony was profound. The man who had once pioneered cryptanalysis now lived in a world built on unbreakable encryption. In the mid-1990s, Tutte's contributions began to attract renewed attention. Documentaries and books started featuring his story, often portraying him as the other genius of Bletchley Park. Historians marveled at how he had deduced the Lorenz machine entirely from logic. Some even compared his mental reconstruction to Newton's or Einstein's abstract reasoning, achievements born purely from thought. Tutte, when asked about such comparisons, simply smiled. "That's very kind," he said, "but I wouldn't go that far." He preferred to talk about mathematics, not war. To him, the essence of discovery lay not in victory, but in understanding. When asked how he managed to keep such a complex structure in his mind, he answered, "I could see the patterns. Once you see them, you can't unsee them." In 2002, Bill Tutte passed away at the age of 84. His funeral was quiet, attended by family, friends, and colleagues who remembered him not as a hero, but as a man of intellect and kindness. Obituaries appeared in major newspapers across Britain and Canada. For many readers, it was the first time they had heard his name, and the first time they learned that one of the world's first computers had been built on his equations. After his death, tributes poured in. The University of Waterloo established the Tutte Institute for Mathematics and Computing, dedicated to research in cryptography and data science. The British government honored him with exhibitions at Bletchley Park, and mathematicians around the world began referring to his wartime logic as the Tutte solution. His story became a reminder that not all wars are fought with weapons. Some are fought and won with reason. As the digital age advanced, the parallels grew stronger. Modern encryption, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence all echoed Tutte's principle. Information can be both shield and sword. Every line of code written today carries traces of the logic first used to defeat Lorenz. Bill Tutte never sought fame, yet his legacy became part of the invisible architecture of the modern world. The secrecy that once concealed his work now underscored its importance. The more technology evolved, the clearer his relevance became. From wartime ciphers to quantum computing, the line of descent was unmistakable, and it began with a young mathematician in a cold English hut, armed with nothing but paper, patience, and thought. And so, we must ask, in an age ruled by algorithms and information, do we still recognize the quiet thinkers whose logic shapes our world? Or have their names become the new secrets of our time? Waterloo, Canada, winter 2002. Snow covered the quiet campus where Bill Tutte had spent the final decades of his life. His office lights were off now, his chalkboards wiped clean, but his presence lingered, in the halls, in the minds of his students, and in the very logic that powered the digital world outside. The man who once decrypted the secrets of Hitler's high command had passed away, quietly, as he had lived. In the weeks after his death, colleagues at the University of Waterloo gathered to share memories. They spoke not of war or machines, but of patience, kindness, and brilliance hidden behind humility. To many of them, Tutte had been more than a mathematician. He had been a teacher who made complexity feel simple, who showed that every problem, no matter how impossible, could be solved by reason. Across the ocean in Britain, tributes flowed in from military historians, codebreakers, and cryptographers. For decades, his story had been overshadowed by the fame of Alan Turing and the Enigma machine. But as researchers dug deeper into the archives, they realized something extraordinary. Tutte's reconstruction of the Lorenz cipher was not just another wartime success. It was a mathematical miracle. The Lorenz machine, designed for the German High Command, had been believed unbreakable. It used 12 rotors, each producing an independent stream of binary signals. The number of possible combinations exceeded 1 trillion. No machine of that era could have tested them all, yet Tutte had solved it by hand, not by guessing, but by understanding. He had looked into chaos and seen structure, into noise and found logic. Historians began calling his discovery the greatest intellectual feat of the Second World War. British intelligence officials admitted, years later, that the insights derived from Tutte's work had saved countless lives and likely shortened the conflict by years. And beyond the battlefield, his ideas had set the foundations for computer science itself. When visitors walk today through the restored rooms of Bletchley Park, they see a small plaque with his name. It reads simply, William Thomas Tutte, 1917-2002, mathematician and codebreaker, reconstructed the Lorenz cipher machine. No elaborate language, no dramatic praise, just facts, fitting for a man who believed that truth by itself was enough. Yet the deeper legacy of Bill Tutte cannot be measured in machines or medals. It lives in the philosophy his life embodied, that the greatest revolutions begin in thought, not in force. His pencil and paper, his silent concentration in a crowded wartime hut, were as powerful as any weapon. He fought a war of logic, and in doing so, helped define the information age. His work in graph theory would later underpin entire scientific disciplines, from computer networking to chemistry to operations research. The concept of analyzing systems by their connections rather than their components was central to Tutte's thinking. He saw relationships where others saw fragments. That same way of seeing allowed him to rebuild Lorenz, and later to map the hidden mathematics of everything from molecules to data structures. In the decades after his passing, Tutte's influence only grew. The Tutte Institute for Mathematics and Computing, named in his honor, became a cornerstone of Canada's research in cryptography and cybersecurity. Scholars there study encryption, data protection, and mathematical modeling, the very fields that Tutte's wartime work helped create. His legacy is not just in the past, it lives in every secure transaction, every encoded message, every algorithm that guards or reveals truth. Visitors who meet the mathematicians at the Tutte Institute often notice a small framed photograph of him on the wall. A modest man in a tweed jacket, eyes calm, expression thoughtful. Beneath it, a line reads, "In science, as in life, it is not enough to see the world, one must understand it." Those words, often attributed to Tutte by his former students, capture the quiet essence of his genius. His story reminds us that history is not always written by those who command armies or lead nations. Sometimes it is written by those who listen, who look, think, and refuse to accept that complexity cannot be conquered. Bill Tutte never raised his voice, never sought fame, and never used his discovery for power. He simply solved the problem before him, and in doing so, gave the modern world its language of logic. In the 21st century, as the world wrestles with questions of surveillance, encryption, and digital ethics, Tutte's legacy feels more relevant than ever. His wartime mission, to break secrets for peace, has transformed into a global debate about how knowledge itself should be used. The tools he helped create now protect both freedom and secrecy, truth and deception. The same equations that once dismantled tyranny now defend privacy and democracy. Looking back, it is hard not to wonder how Tutte would have viewed this new world, one where billions of encrypted messages travel every second, where artificial intelligence deciphers patterns he could have only dreamed of, where logic has become both shield and sword. Perhaps he would have smiled and said what he once told a colleague: "The challenge never ends. There is always another pattern to find." In a century defined by noise and speed, Bill Tutte's life is a quiet counterpoint, proof that patience, precision, and integrity can change the world as profoundly as power or wealth. He never built monuments, yet his work is embedded in the circuitry of every computer, the logic of every code, the heartbeat of every digital connection. His genius was not theatrical, it was thoughtful, not loud, but lasting. And today, when we unlock our phones, send encrypted messages, or trust algorithms to guide our choices, we are, in a sense, living in the world that Bill Tutte helped create. A world built on the belief that human reasoning can outthink even the darkest complexity. So we end with one final question. If knowledge itself can be a weapon, who decides how it should be used, and can humanity ever truly keep its own secrets?